In my last video about Monster Hunter, I showed you how I created my own custom monster. But as many of you have pointed out in the comments, a lot was missing from the video. That's because I was kinda sick for most of December. So, working on the video, drawing and just generally existing kinda looked like this. And I wanted to get the video out, and I decided that I can't cut these things out. They're not what's essential to the video. What was essential is the monster and the creation process behind the monster. But I must admit, I would have also preferred if I would have spent more time on the ecology and maybe an armor set. So that's what I'm gonna do today. Plumaya is a large scavenger type monster, comparable in size to the likes of Barioth or Rathalos. It lives in colder mountainous regions, where it prefers to build its nest high up in the mountain peaks. Due to spending most of their life in the mountains, they are expert climbers, being able to scale the steep cliffs of their home turf with relative ease. But as you might have noticed, it also has wings. These wings are too small for any long distance or acrobatic flying, but they are enough for short bursts of flight and gliding between the mountains it inhabits. Just like its real-world counterpart, the bearded vulture, Plumaya feasts on the bones of already deceased monsters. But in times of need, or just due to a lack of available carcasses, Plumaya can hunt very efficiently. When it is forced to hunt, Plumaya prefer ambushing their prey, usually hunting for things like Popo, Velociprey or other small monsters that they can find within their turf. But in even greater times of need, Plumaya will also hunt large monsters like Lagombi or Bulldrome. Due to its rather specific diet, it rarely comes into conflict with other predators, but when it does, it is no pushover. Because that would suck. I don't want to design a weak monster. Because of its rather impressive bulk, it has enough strength to match the likes of Barioth or Volgrangenath, with which it often shares its territory. When in battle, Plumaya can rear up the feathers on its body, and because of the increased blood flow, have them glow a bright red. In this state they are more vulnerable, but can also deal larger amounts of damage, due to their muscles being flooded with blood and adrenaline. What also happens when they enter this enraged state is that an organ on their neck will swell up, allowing them to spit their stomach acid at their foes. This ability is not unique to their enraged mode, but during their enraged mode they can make far better use of their acid spitting capabilities. This acid is used to properly dissolve the bones it digests, and is therefore very strong, even being able to corrode and partially dissolve metals. But I think one of the things most of you guys want to know is where would this thing be on the food chain? Because, well, Monster Hunter has a rather well-established food chain of apex predators, normal predators, and you can just kind of put every monster into its own category, seeing where it compares to others. Well, in terms of Plumaya's placement on the food chain, I would put it somewhere below monsters like Tigrex, Gossarak or Gammoth, so just straight below the apex predator category. I don't want my monster to be a pushover, maybe that's just my self-indulgence speaking, but I don't think it's fun creating things that are supposed to be weak in a fan art kind of way. If I were to design like an entire game, of course I would design weaker monsters or just fodder enemies. That much is clear, and those weaker monsters have their charm. Certainly some of my favorite monsters are weaker monsters, but I don't know, feels kind of boring making monsters that are just meant to be walked over. What I'm trying to say is, Plumaya is a solid heavy hitter, but definitely no apex predator. With the ecology now out of the way, it's time to actually start designing something. And that something would be the armor set. Armor sets in Monster Hunter are very important, because they are the reason we go out and kill these peaceful creatures, doing their best to survive in a cruel and dangerous world. But hey, look at these boots! With the variety of monsters comes of course a variety of armor sets. All of these armor sets are uniquely different. Some draw a direct inspiration from the monster and its physiology. Some draw from different cultures and themes that influence the design of the monster. And others just seem to be inspired by whatever the artist that designed them found interesting at the moment. Because look at this and tell me with a straight face that the artist that made this wasn't watching mecha anime. But of course, as with all good things, there is cohesion. So what's the most cohesive element of Monster Hunter armor? Well, that would be that every armor forged from a monster incorporates parts of the monster into its design. They might not have the same origin point, they might not have the same inspiration, but they all use parts of the monster. It sounds kind of obvious, it is kind of obvious, and this point is redundant. But before I go on and talk about how I designed my own armor set, I want to highlight what I think makes an armor set in Monster Hunter good. At least to me. I find that the best armor sets in Monster Hunter take elements of the monster and infuse them with actual armors, so that they are not just a jumbled together mess of monster parts, but more something that looks like it was enhanced using the parts of the monster. Examples for this are Quemetris, Balahara, Rathalos, or Anjanath. I love all of these armor sets deeply, and of course that's the direction I want to take my own armor set in. But even with the direction in mind, I still felt kind of aimless. For my initial design, I was just working with the rule of cool, and that was bad. My only guiding thought was Western Knight with monster parts, and that led nowhere. The design looked bland, uninspired, and just lazy. And I don't think I have to tell you that that's not what you want. So I was kinda lost. But thankfully I have the comment section, where it was suggested that I take a look at the habitats of the bearded vulture, so that I can be inspired by the culture of the regions. And after looking at the map that I found on Wikipedia for approximately 2 minutes, what eventually caught my eye was Mongolia. And as far as I am aware, there aren't really any Mongolian-esque armor sets in Monster Hunter, or at least I couldn't find any during my research. But this is a great opportunity for me to make my design stand out. I designed these armor sets with the Monster Hunter Wilds armor system in mind, where you can craft both types of armor sets regardless of your gender. So, of course, I want both armor sets to not just look good on their own, but also when they are combined in different variations. I started out with the male version of the armor. The male version is supposed to represent a more traditional warrior aesthetic, so that's what I kept in mind when working, using historical references and other fantasy artwork to kind of guide my work. My favorite part of this design is definitely the helmet. I can't really pinpoint a singular reference for the helmet, but I try to base it off the hats worn by Mongolian eagle hunters. But the rest of the armor is more traditional warrior plate mixed with monster parts to still emulate the feeling of a Mongolian warrior, whilst also showing the adaptation for colder climates. The female version, on the other hand, was a bit more tricky, because I didn't just want to repeat the exact same armor, but this time with boobs. Of course, the armor sets had to be connected in some way. They are both crafted from the same materials after all. So taking that into account, for the female version I try to work with a less armored archer vibe, because one of the most well-known aspects of Mongolian history and culture is the archery of the Mongolian people. So I definitely wanted that to translate into my design. For reference, I used more free-flowing clothes like the classic deal, commonly worn across Mongolia. Of course, same as with the male armor, I used the feathers and the scales all across the design to kind of invoke this built out of nature feeling. My biggest issue in general wasn't with the gender differences, but more with the separation of the parts. In Monster Hunter, your armor is separated into 5 different parts: head, chest, arms, waist, and legs. And of course you kind of have to design each part individually, or at least to function individually. You need to be able to equip them and use them with other pieces of armor, and that puts restrictions on what you can design. For example, the arms can't really be one continuous thing, as they have to separate below the shoulder. Same goes for the chest piece and the waist. And as this was the first time I designed armor specifically for a video game, I struggled a lot with this. Usually I draw the outfit of a character as one whole piece, and I rarely concern myself with separating the different parts of the outfit. As a whole, this wasn't the biggest issue for the male armor set, as every part of that kind of comes separately anyway, so I kind of just had to stick them together like a Lego set. Where the problems arose most frequently was the female armor set. The, I'm just gonna call it, overcoat was supposed to look like one continuous piece. And we already established that it cannot be that. It cannot be one continuous thing. Well, shit. But problems are meant to be solved. So I booted up Monster Hunter and had a look around the different armor pieces. And after a bit of searching, I landed on the master rank version of the Tobi Kadachi armor. It doesn't look anything like what I'm trying to make, but as you may notice, its coat seems to be one continuous piece. But that is where you're wrong. You were tricked, bamboozled, hoodwinked even! See, there's this genius invention that helps these two separate pieces look as if they were one.
Belt.
Listen, I know. This is a very simple solution, but you gotta trust me. It's a deceptively complex design with multiple intriguing layers of visual manipulation. The inner machinations of the design complexities wouldn't make sense to an ordinary mind. It is as if the gods themselves had decided that this thing is meant to be. After that, the main issues were having similar textures and deciding what of these armor pieces is actually made from monster material and which one is just leather or metal. And I landed on a few different solutions. For example, most of the female armor set is cloth, whilst most of the male armor set is the leather of the creature made into different armor parts. The main thing I wanted to use from the monster were of course its feathers, but I also wanted to incorporate the scales that line the back of the monster. I kinda just worked these in all over the design, making it look like someone just ripped these off the monster and hammered it onto the armor. All in all, even though this isn't the first time I drew armor, it is the first time I've drawn armor specifically for Monster Hunter and with the Monster Hunter aesthetic in mind. Of course there's always something you can improve, but I think that at this point in time, this is the best I can do, and I'm very happy with that. Well, that's it. We reached the end of this video. I really enjoyed this little project, and I'm probably gonna do one of these again in the future. Maybe an Elder Dragon or something similar. I don't know, I'll see where the journey takes me. But until then, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!